This week's episode is brought to you by Sin Bodhi's custom LJNs. Go to facebook.com/SinsLJNs. That's SINNSLJNS. And check out the amazing work that Sin Bodhi does with his custom action figures. If you would like a custom LJN style 8-inch figure of yourself or your favorite professional wrestler, just contact Sin Bodhi. Get your custom wrestling figure from an actual pro wrestler. Sin Bodhi has great designs, great prices, and he is really good looking. He told me to say that, and I agreed to it. Why? Because he is. Listen to the commercial halfway through this episode with one of my amazingly cute children, and they'll tell you more about why you should check out Sins LJNs at facebook.com/SINNSLJNS. Sin Bodhi's custom LJNs.
Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life. Is wrestling.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with Cody Diener. I am Cody Diener, and I am a professional wrestler. I'm a professional wrestling producer. I'm a professional and traveling motivational speaker. I am a professional dad, a father of 4 wonderful kids, and I am a semi-professional podcaster. I can start to say I'm a semi-professional podcaster because to be a professional, you got to make some money doing it. And I'm making a little bit of money doing this because of my wonderful patrons over at patreon.com/Cody Diener. I appreciate all of you patrons over there, whether you're a level 1 mark or a level 2 smart mark or a level 3 Diener Maniac mega mark. I appreciate you. If you want this show early and ad-free, as well as bonus stories from all of my guests and a whole bunch of backstage impact stuff, personal family stuff, things that I do not share with the world through my social media, but only with my dedicated patrons, head on over to patreon.com/Cody Diener. It's one way that you can help support this podcast and this adventure that I'm going on into the podcast world. I very much appreciate the feedback that I get from people. I'm hearing from a lot of folks that this is not like any other podcast that they listen to in terms of wrestling podcasts, because there's a lot of them out there, and I'm getting the feedback that this is different. I love it. It's different than any other podcast that I listen to in terms of wrestling podcasts. I love that. Most recently, if you follow me on my social media at Cody Diener, you would have learned along with me that this podcast you're listening to right now was recently in the top 40 wrestling podcasts in all of Canada. As a proud Canadian, that makes me proud, and I never expected to be so high on a list of hundreds, thousands. There's thousands of wrestling podcasts out there, and for me to break like the top 40 is all thanks to you guys. So if you are enjoying this show, please take a screenshot that you're listening to this right now, whether you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Just take a screenshot, share it on your social media, tag me in it at Cody Diener. Tell the world why you love this podcast, and I'll make sure that I share, retweet anything that you post on your socials. And I appreciate you very much helping me spread the word about Wrestling is Life is Wrestling. You are going to love today's guest. Today's guest has been a friend of mine for well over 2 decades. And if you are an Impact Wrestling fan, then the last number of weeks, you have learned some things about this person that he has never shared with the world before. And of course, I'm talking about my good friend, Crazzy Steve. If you did not see the recent sit-down interviews one-on-one with Crazzy Steve, you need to go watch those right now. I highly encourage you to go watch those. Go to the Impact socials at Impact Wrestling, and you can also go to Crazzy Steve's social media. He's been sharing them with the world as well. These are crazy, creative, intriguing things that are 100% real. Like, this podcast is called Wrestling is Life, and Life is Wrestling. Steve opened up in the sit-down interviews on Impact Wrestling and shared of himself in a way that this world of wrestling and the world of his real life have intertwined in such a creative, real, authentic, super cool way. I'm so proud of my friend, Crazy Steve. And what's really neat inside scoop here is I recorded this interview, this 3-part series that we're going to have. I recorded it before Steve recorded his 3-part interview with Impact Wrestling. They just, by the universe, was listening and knew that Steve's story had to get out, and we did our interview, and then he learned like right after we did it that he was going to be doing this with Impact Wrestling, get a chance to share his personal story with Impact. So I've been holding on to this one for past couple weeks and letting you listen to some wonderful guests like Joe Hendry. Thank you for everybody who gave me positive feedback on the Joe Hendry episodes. Thank you for Joe. And I'm not going to share what he said. I wasn't planning on saying this, but I want to say this personal thank you to Joe. He sent me such a kind personal message after our interview and the podcast aired, praising me and hadn't saying nothing but super kind things about that interview and how I conducted myself as a podcaster. And man, he just said such nice things. So thank you, Joe, if you're listening to this. You're the man, and I can't wait to have you on again in the future. I know my listeners can't wait as well. But going back to today's guest, Crazy Steve, I've been holding on to these to let the world see this amazing piece of art, really, that Steve has put out at Impact Wrestling and the producers at Impact Wrestling have put out. Again, I can't praise it heavily enough. If you haven't seen the sit-down interview with Crazy Steve, you need to go watch that now. So hit pause, go watch that. I will wait, and then you come back and listen into this, because this is going to end up being a very good companion piece for the sit-down interview that Steve recently did with Impact Wrestling. I'm going to do a deep dive into the life of my buddy Crazy Steve, because he has led a very, very intriguing, interesting, insightful, motivating, wild story. Crazy Steve is blind. So if you didn't hit pause and go watch that, you might not know about this, but Crazy Steve is legally blind and has been able to reach the top tier of this wrestling industry in a business that most people can't reach to the heights that he has with all of their senses. And Steve is legally blind, and that's not the only obstacle he's had to overcome in his life. I mean, he grew up in the middle of nowhere. He had a very rough upbringing. He dives into all of that with the Impact Wrestling audience in those sit-down interviews, but we take it even more deeper dive into that in this series. So I've been splitting a lot of my interviews with people into 2-parters. This is going to be a 3-parter. This is the first of a trilogy of a sit-down with my buddy Crazy Steve. This is the part 1. I'm going to call this the origin story. Today, you're going to learn about the upbringing of my buddy Steve and a lot of the struggles that he had to go through with his issue, how that even came to light, like how he even learned that he was blind, all of the things that went into that, how he was able to respond to that in his childhood, just everything that goes along with that. It's a wild ride. I am so excited to be able to bring this story to the world. And I'm so appreciative of my friend Steve for being willing to sit down with me and give me so much of his time that I was able to even put this into a 3-parter. That wasn't my intention, but we sat down, and Steve's story that he told me became so epic, and we talked for so long. And I learned things about Steve that I didn't even know after being friends with him for, like I said, 2 decades. I learned things from this interview today that I didn't know. And I'm continuing to learn and reflect on things that I learned from my friend Steve that's helping me in my life knowing what he's been through and how he's able to overcome those things, it's helping me on a daily basis. So I know that some of the things that Steve's going to share today is going to help somebody out there. If that's you, tag at Cody Diener in a post, share it with the world what you've learned from Steve. Tag Steve in the post and let him know what his story means to you, because his story is a meaningful one, and I'm so happy to bring it to everybody. If you get to the end of today's episode and you're like, why is Cody making me wait for part 2 next week and part 3 the week after that? I can't wait to hear part 2 and 3. I want to hear it now. Well, guess what? You can. Go on over to patreon.com/Cody Diener right now. The entire sit-down interview with my buddy Steve, early and ad-free, is up there right now, both in video form and audio form. It's all there right now at patreon.com/Cody Diener, as well as a bonus story with my buddy Steve that he has never told is also over on Patreon. It's a fun little story. You can go check that out right now. Patreon.com/Cody Diener. That's just one way you can support me. Another way you can support me is get a cameo at cameo.com/Cody Diener. Somebody's birthday, a loved one is having a graduation. You want to get a Halloween present, you want to get a early Christmas present, start thinking about giving them something cool like a cameo from me at cameo.com/Cody Diener. You can buy a t-shirt over at prowrestlingtees.com/Cody Diener. Check out the YouTube channel. If you're not watching this and you're just listening to this right now and you want to see the video form of this, every week I'm putting out the videos. You can share the shorts that I'm sharing with your friends. Spread the word about Wrestling is Life is Wrestling through YouTube at youtube.com/@Cody Diener podcast. If you want to advertise on this show, you want to increase your business, get people that normally wouldn't know about your business knowing about your business, then hit me up at ads@codydiener.com. That's ads@codydiener.com, or just go to codydiener.com/podcast and fill in the form there, and we will bring more business to your business. Rate, review, and subscribe on whatever platform you are on. That helps the algorithm and helps more people learn about this show. Okay, I'm a shameless self-promoter. I am done self-promoting. Let's get over this and jump into what everybody's here for, and that is part 1 with my buddy, my friend, the amazing, the inspiring, the insightful. Oh man, you guys are going to love this. Here it is, part 1 with my good friend, Crazzy Steve. We're just going to jump right in here. I'm not going to give you a glowing introduction put over, even though you deserve it. Like, we've started, and this is the beginning. And we probably, when you start these things, people go through all of your accolades and list all of your Wikipedia accomplishments that they've read and put you over. I'm going to put you over in the best way that I can right now, Steve, and say you're one of my best friends and I love you.
Oh, that's perfect. That's the
okay.
best one.
It is. That's the best one.
Yeah. Okay.
So
okay,
but I did do an intro for you because I recorded a fancy thing that you're not going to hear, so you can listen to this later, and listen to the glowing introduction I gave you. But I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it right now, other than to say that I love you because you're one of my good friends, which is one of the reasons I wanted to do this. And I think, well, it's just one of the reasons I want to do this. I want to do this because you're a good friend of mine. But when I came up with the idea for this podcast, it's called Wrestling is Life is Wrestling. I started to go through my mental Rolodex of who are the people that I want to talk to for this. People that are very successful professional wrestlers that I think fans are going to dig listening to because they're just a wrestling fan. But people that have a really cool life story, and people that think about wrestling and how it connects to their life, and they intertwine them in some degree within their career. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't, but they think about those things. And I know from being your friend that those are things that you think about deeply because you love wrestling just as much as I do. And I know your life story, and it's freaking unreal and amazing. And I want more people to know your amazing life story as much as you're willing to share of it, I guess, at least. So I'm going to let you decide how much of that you want to share over the next little bit, but I know it, and I think more people should know it. Is that something that you're cool with doing?
Yeah, absolutely. However, so you, Jeremy, who's Eric Young,
Yes.
Luke Gallows, all good friends of mine, and all say very similar things.
Okay.
As it pertains to who I am and how I've come up and all that stuff. But then I feel like, to me, it's just my life. I don't know that it is as amazing or as you guys, like, I think you guys would almost be better storytellers of my life than I am, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
Because to me, it's just like, this is what I've had nothing else to compare it to. So this is just what it is, right? So I think, so there's like a little bit of pressure, but I'm happy to share anything.
Yeah,
that's never been an issue.
Let me put you at ease then if you feel like there's pressure.
Yeah.
Anything that you say related to your life story is going to blow people's freaking minds. It doesn't blow your mind because of what you just said. That's just your life. Right. And I have a couple questions that are very specific that when I was writing down some questions to ask you, I'm thinking Steve's not even going to know that how to even answer this because it's just, that's his normal. But
for sure.
But your normal, Steve, is very much not the norm of the average person in life, and definitely not the norm for a professional wrestler, which is why you're one of the most fascinating people that I know. And I want people to, I think anyone that's listening to this is going to end up being equally as fascinated. Let's start with just a softball question. Maybe it's a softball question. I don't know, because it's not for me, because I was trying to answer this myself when I didn't know what the answer was.
Perfect.
When did we first meet? And do you remember when we first met?
We would have met in 2003.
Okay, good. You're already ahead of me because I'm terrible with dates.
Yes. So, okay. So 2 memories come to mind right away.
Great.
And I don't know which one came first. I don't remember action. I don't remember the first time we actually met, but it was either at a Neo show, like one of my first Neo pro wrestling show was Redemption with EY and Danger Boy in the ladder match for frame of reference. Okay. That's my first experience with Neo. That's my second ever independent wrestling show.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So for people that don't know, this is quite legendary, and we'll have a lot of Ontario indie wrestlers listening to this, and Ontario indie wrestling fans that are going to know, like, that was kind of a turning point for independent wrestling in Ontario. Danger Boy Derek Wilde against Showtime Eric Young ladder match, like 800 people in this hall just to watch independent wrestling. It was freaking awesome, and what a good second show to be a part of. That must have rocked your world.
It blew my mind. You can see me. I'm sitting there front row with my video camera. You can see.
Nice.
Yeah. Did you wrestle JC Owens on that show?
See, I'm terrible with this. I wrestled JC Owens many times.
Yes.
And did the whole angle with him. But I don't know if it was that show or not. I can't remember.
So it was either that time, which probably is the accurate one. But then the other moment that I remember is you coming into EY's class, because I believe you had a match with Hacker or like a match with Laz or some sort of big match, because every Neo show was like our big shows. And so you came into class and were just working stuff out on your own. And so you were a part of class that day. But like, I don't know that we had really hung out prior to that. So cool. But either way, the year was 2003. Those were my memories. One happened in March. The other would have been in the summer. So they happened.
Good. Was I a jerk to you?
No, I don't ever remember that. No.
Okay, that's good.
It wasn't until you really got to know me. Then you're a jerk.
So, once we became, so that's how you know that I liked you, Steve. As soon as I started being a jerk to you, we're like, okay, this guy's my buddy now. That's how that's my love language. Led me into a
false sense of security.
That's my love language, being a complete douchebag. And then now we're friends. Okay, so that's that's my memory too, Steve. I didn't remember the context, but I do remember you in wrestling school and being there part of the WrestlePlex with EY, all of those things. And then right around I met you, probably the first day, or maybe I didn't even realize this at first, was your medical issue that you have. And then it just blew my freaking mind and rocked my world, and is just one of the main components as to why you are a fascinating person. For those of you that listen to this and don't realize this, and there will be, which is also amazing as a testament to your talent, there's people that are listening to this and watching this right now that don't know, Steve, that you are legally blind. A legally blind professional wrestler. What exactly is your medical issue, and what's the story behind that?
Okay, so yeah, so the story behind that is I was a premature baby. And so what happened after that was they put me into an incubator. And when they pump the oxygen that they pump into the incubator can sometimes form cataracts in infants, which is what happened to me. I just happened to be the lucky guy. But my parents obviously don't know this because I'm a baby. And when they took me home, I'm not doing anything, right? So once I started kind of moving around, and like my parents realized fairly quickly after that, like he's active, but like he just kind of sits to himself. And like when he doesn't follow the finger with the eye test or anything like that. So something is clearly wrong. And so they had diagnosed that I was blind. What happened following that was they removed the cataracts. It's, if I could compare it to anything, it's similar to LASIK surgery that people get today. That happened to me, but in like 1984.
Oh,
So
yeah. So not nearly as advanced. And
nowhere near.
And
And
it was somewhat experimental too, wasn't it? Or like there was a risk involved.
I spent a lot of my youth in Children's Hospital, and I'm in my case specifically, from what I have been told, has been put in literature, like in actual books.
Oh, wow.
This condition, and like, so they used my case specifically for it. I've never seen this by no means, but this is what I was told. And so that gave me sight after that surgery. But I also have glaucoma. But I have a certain condition of glaucoma that like when people say they have glaucoma, it usually happens in older adults or aging adults. And as they grow older, the glaucoma levels get worse and worse and worse. And that can cause, very poor vision. Whereas my glaucoma it was given to me right off the bat, but it doesn't, as I age, it doesn't necessarily age with me. It just stays at a certain level. Now I have to take eye drops morning and night to keep those levels steady, but it's not the same concern as it would be with somebody who's like in their 70s and 80s and has it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So your current eyesight is going to be what your current eyesight is for the rest of your life, or it's not going to get worse?
Okay, so yes, but as everyone ages, our eyesight continues to get worse.
Sure.
For a lot of people, and mine will, but it's not at the rate that glaucoma determines in other people.
Gotcha. Okay. So what my tendency is to be like, well, how did this affect how you were as a kid and all that stuff? But again, you don't know how that affects you as a kid because you're just a kid. So like, what kind of kid were you? If you could describe yourself as a young kid.
Yeah. I was like really shy. Mm-hmm. Very artsy. Like I still like to draw and stuff like that. I kept to myself for like, I could be entertained for hours and hours and hours on end by myself. I did have like, close. I did have like my circle of friends. Then I kept them close, and they were like, I'm still best friends with one of my, like the first friend I ever met in kindergarten, and I got a few of those who I still keep in touch with. So, but I was never like the popular kid by any stretch of the imagination. And again, so like from a fashion standpoint, I've got to wear glasses, but like glasses nowadays are completely different than what they were when I was like 5 or 6.
Oh, geez. Yeah. I never thought of that.
Yeah. So, and to be fair, they tried to put contacts in my eyes when I was a kid. I don't remember this. but they tried to. But again, like, okay, so my lenses in my glasses are very thick, right? Like now, if I were to show you them, and that is through years of technology. Whereas like back then, they looked like Coke bottles. My glasses did.
Right.
So you can imagine how thick a contact lens would be. And my mom, yeah. So they tried that first, though, apparently, and my mom said it was like they were torturing me. She hated it. She was like, "Well, just buy him glasses. I don't want to do this contact thing," because I don't remember any of this, but that's from her words. She said I hated it, and it was like I was being tortured when they were trying to put them in my eyes. So we opted for glasses. But that being said, these glasses are huge, right? Like not only are they thick, so they make my eyes look magnetized, but they cover half of my face. So they're heavy.
Steve.
Dude. Yeah.
So were you bullied? Like, were you a bullied kid then, like crazy or what?
I wouldn't say like crazy, but I definitely had a target, right? Like,
yeah, because kids are awful. I mean? Kids are freaking relentless. They're ruthless.
Yes.
Oh, did you know or feel different than the other kids? Like, did you know that you were different, or did you feel that difference, or did you just, like you said, off the hop, like, oh, that was just your normal, or did you walk around with this feeling and knowing of being a different kid?
I think that would have, maybe not as a child, maybe around like, I can tell you the first time that it happened.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The first time that I was really like kind of aware of it. And like maybe there was like some sort of, I know there are times where like I'm being picked for soccer, or like all the kids are picking kids and I'd be like one of the last ones picked, right? Because of my eyesight. But I'll tell you the one that really got me. I was about 9 or 10, and my parents had split up, and we lived in this like small little area of like townhouses for like lower income families. And I'm hanging out in the room with a bunch of the kids who live in this neighborhood. We're all sitting around, whatever. And like, their ages range from like, 9, 10, 11, 13, right? And there was like an older girl, and she was talking to all of us boys, and they were asking her which one she thought was cutest. And so she looked around the room, and then she looked at me, and she's like, no, not you. And she's like, well, wait, take off your glasses. So I took off my glasses, and my eyes are still screwy. Like I have like a lazy eye. And so she saw it. She's like, no, still not you. It's like, oh, okay. All right.
Right? Steve. Right.
Went around the room. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the one that pops up right away when you bring up the question.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, I know I have bad eyesight and all, but I can still see what I look like, and I get it to a degree. Like I can understand, like it is weird looking, or there's something off about it, I suppose, right? Because again, my eye is lazy, and so, but that, yeah.
So you said it in passing, but this is also part of your story that I don't want to skim over, that I think is really important, because I talk to a lot of kids in my other career as a motivational speaker. And I talked to a lot of kids that grew up in low income housing. They grew up in a really tough financial situation. And you just kind of said it in passing, but that was your situation too, right? Like you didn't grow up with a whole bunch of money.
No, God, no. When my parents were together, we were like, medium income. We weren't struggling for anything, but we certainly weren't rich. And then when they split up, I lived with my mom at first, and she was sick. My entire life with her, she was always ill. She was like healthy at like 23, and then from then on had like problems with. She had like both her kidneys were removed. She had to be on dialysis. She had cancer multiple times, like just always sick. So I chose at a very young age to live with her, thinking, oh, no, I got to be like the man of the house sort of thing. And that was when we really lived in like lower income housing because she couldn't work. So it was, and then like, and I would eventually move back home with my dad because I wasn't like the social circle that I was around with my mom. It was either non-existent or I missed being home. And so, yeah, I bounced around quite a bit from different houses. And then even my parents tried getting back together at one point only to split up again. It was constantly like that.
Right. So you have all those, like, those issues that you're talking about right there are enough to break a lot of kids and
Sure.
break a lot of people. And I've heard EY say this about you, and every time he says it, it rings true. And I'm sure he said this in front of you, but he has said this to me multiple times about you, is based on your upbringing and your situation. You know, you grew up in, a lot of people don't realize this, because I really relate to this, because you grew up in small little rural Southern Ontario town, which I did as well, where the majority of the people that we know, Steve, grew up to just be, you know, alcoholic losers that, you know, they just drink and do drugs and don't have a good job and sleep around and have no motivation to accomplish anything in their life. And they are complete wastes of space and are not productive citizens in society. They don't have any good qualities. They're just, they exist and don't contribute anything to either their families or society or anything. That, based on the percentage of how people end up in that situation, you should have been that person. You should be that person that is a complete loser, because you have all the excuses. You have all the excuses that a lot of people, you have more excuses than most, because from my experience, most people, they lean on the excuses and they grow up as victims. And I talk about this when I speak to youth, is to not grow up with a victim mentality. If anyone in my life should have grown up with a victim mentality, it's you, because of the scenario, with your eyes, you have all these obstacles that you've had to overcome to succeed at anything, let alone the crazy job of professional wrestling, which we're going to get to. Like, there's something about you, Steve, that makes you go, no, I'm not going to think that way. Do you have any idea what that is about you that makes you just decide you're not going to live as a victim?
Okay, so I don't. That's a hard one, because again, like, to me, you're playing with the hand you're dealt, right?
Okay,
and we're all not all of us are playing with a fair hand. It's just, that's how it works.
Sure.
I don't think I looked at it that way when, like I, because I'd be walking home from, like, the same job every day, the same walk, the same streets all the time, and I would think to myself, "Whoa, I can't wait to get out of here. Why can't I, there'll be a time where I won't be walking these streets. I'll be walking somewhere else, and I'll be out of this small town." Because I always looked at it. I was at least looked at myself as, like, I'm bigger than this town. Like, a lot of, like, what you were saying, a lot of those people would like to blame the town. Oh, well, it's, there's no jobs here. It's, this town sucks, and it's the town that is dragging me down. And, like, I was never going to be a victim of my surroundings, and I always thought, well, it's not the town, it's what you make of it, right?
And we're going to take a quick commercial break to tell you about an amazing place and an amazing person. If you want to learn how to be a professional wrestler and you want to be the best, you got to learn from the best. You've got to go to Net Pro Studios, where one of the head trainers is a good friend of mine, Crazzy Steve. Now, to tell you more about this place, I'm brought on a guest to tell me about this and to get his reactions about this amazing place called Net Pro Studios. Who are we talking to right now?
Abel.
Yes, this is my son, Abel. You've heard him on the podcast before. How old are you again, Abel?
9.
This is my 9-year-old son, Abel. Now, Abel, Net Pro Studios. What do you think of that name?
Cool.
It is a cool name. I like the name, too. Now, what about Crazzy Steve? What do you think of that name?
Cool.
What would you expect Crazzy Steve to be like?
Crazy.
Exactly. Do you know a really cool fact about Crazzy Steve? There's something really neat about him that my listeners know about, but I'm not sure if you know about him.
He's blind?
He's blind. Can you imagine being able to go to a top rope and jump off a top rope and land on somebody if you're blind?
Epic.
It is pretty epic. I have no idea how he does it. His life is really cool. His life is crazy. And you got to think about this too, Abel. If he's able to get into a ring and do all those amazing things, can you imagine what he could teach somebody else? You have to be pretty talented to be able to do what he does, right?
You could teach somebody to be like a Ricochet.
Oh, yeah. I could teach somebody how to do really cool moves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could teach somebody how to do all these amazing things. Steve is one of the best professional wrestlers in the world, and he's passing on all of his knowledge and his talent at Net Pro Studios. It's at 100 Emery Lane, Kingsport, Tennessee, United States. But you don't have to be in the United States to go to this wrestling school. All around the world, they're accepting students. And if you want to learn more, go to netprostudios@gmail.com. Abel, can you say that for me? Netprostudios?
NetProStudios
@gmail.com.
@gmail.com.
@gmail.com. That's right. Now, would you personally like to be a professional wrestler, Abel?
Mm-hmm.
I think if I was going to let you be a professional wrestler, I'd send you to Crazy Steve's wrestling school. Not just because Steve's the best, but I also very much love the name of their arena. Do you know the name of their arena that they call the place where they train?
No.
Let me tell you, I think you're going to think this is pretty cool. It's Beautiful Bobby Eaton Arena.
What?
Yeah. Now, Beautiful Bobby Eaton, unfortunately, he's passed away. He died. But his family gave Steve and all the people that started NetPro Studios, they gave them the blessing to call their arena Beautiful Bobby Eaton Arena. So they do that in honor of their friend, Beautiful Bobby Eaton. Isn't that neat?
Yeah, that's really cool.
That is really cool. And you know something about Beautiful Bobby Eaton? He was a very beautiful man. Everybody liked Bobby Eaton. Nobody ever had to say a bad thing about Bobby Eaton. If you asked anybody in wrestling what they thought about Bobby Eaton, they would only say good things. That's important, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's important that if people talk about you, that they say kind things and nice things, because that means that you're a kind person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen a Beautiful Bobby Eaton match?
No, but I've seen you wearing a t-shirt, and I have a t-shirt.
That's right. We both have a t-shirt. And you're actually wrong. I've shown you some Beautiful Bobby Eaton matches. They're in a tag team called the Midnight Express. So you've seen some Midnight Express tag team matches. So you've actually seen Beautiful Bobby Eaton, because I show you the old school stuff. I show you some of the older stuff, because that's where the good stuff is, like the stuff that Beautiful Bobby Eaton did. And Steve has learned a thing or two from Beautiful Bobby Eaton. He's passing on that knowledge to his students at Net Pro Studios. So if somebody wants to be a professional wrestler and learn from the best, Abel, where should they go?
NetPro Studios.
Yeah. And where should they contact them at?
I forget.
How about Net Pro Studios?
NetPro Studios
At gmail.com.
gmail.com.
And they can also find them on Facebook, Abel. The Facebook is facebook.com/guess. Guess what it would be. Facebook.com/
NetPro Studios.
That's right. NetPro Studios. NetProStudios. NetPro Studios. And they can learn all about their classes, where they can sign up, how they can sign up, and all the great stuff that they're going to be learning. Should my listeners do that, Abel?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they should. Can you say goodbye to my listeners?
Bye.
So I don't like, I think too, growing up, and like my dad he was an alcoholic to a degree. He was like one of those people who always held a job. We never had to worry about food or anything like that, but he was an abusive alcoholic. Mm-hmm. I'm happy to say, like, fast forward, he hasn't drank in 3 years. He's completely sober, and our relationship is awesome.
Oh, that's awesome.
But yes, it's really good.
I grew up with an alcoholic father as well, so I can definitely relate to that situation immensely. Yeah.
Right.
So that's awesome that he's doing well. That's great.
For sure. I say all that to say any stories I tell that involve the past, they won't put him in a good light. And that's not how I want him to be perceived.
Yeah. And so you don't need to even share those, but that's the scenario. That's the reality. Yeah.
Yes. Right. And so, like, I think it was a part of, like, again, with him he was mostly verbally abusive. Mm-hmm. And so he would take, like, he knew what buttons to press, like all family does, right?
Yeah.
And like when he drank, he was just angry and wanted to argue a bunch. And like, I'm a kid, I have no time for that, and I don't want to do that. But he would say things like, "Oh, you know, I loved wrestling growing up. I was always been obsessed about it." And he would say things like, "You're never going to be Hulk Hogan. You're never going to this, that, and the other." And like, and that I use that as motivation. Not only that, but like seeing how he acted and seeing how, like, what happened when my parents would drink and fight and stuff like that. I grew up. I never, like, all throughout high school, I never really drank, never did any drugs, and it was mostly because I seen how they reacted to it, and I was like, oh, that's not. I don't think that's for me.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, I needed to get out of the town, and in order to do that, I got to get through school. And with my eyes being what they are, school came very hard to me from like high school and everything, not just from a social standpoint, but from an academic standpoint. Like, we're in geography class at 8 a.m. I'm tired. We get in, we shut off all the lights, then we put a big overhead on of a small little map, and I'm supposed to look down in a dark room and write it down, like what I'm seeing. Like,
Wow.
I couldn't do that. I was visually could not do that. So I would have to have a teacher's assistant come in, her name was Candy. She was a sweetheart, super awesome girl. She would sit with me in every class and take down my notes.
Wow.
And then I would have to study them afterwards, right? But you got to think, like, I'm a 16-year-old kid, and in high school, 8 a.m. we get in, we turn off the lights, and I'm supposed to pay attention. I'm falling asleep. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm
And
nodding off.
you're also the kid with candy. Like, oh, there's
And I'm sitting front
there's the
row
dude that
too.
always has candy. Yeah, you're sitting in the front
I'm
row.
not like
Mm-hmm.
I'm always. That was the other thing about high school, or any school. I always had to sit front row.
Ah, right. So
So
that immediately blocks you from certain social situations.
but it also makes you a target too, because you're right in front of everybody else.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. But I was going to ask you, like, what was your formative high school years like?
Yeah.
And that's a very telling thing and situation to have to be in. So one thing that I know helped me, this idea of, I got to get out of this town, which I think is awesome that you had that, because not everybody has that. For one, there's a couple things that stood out to me, what you were just saying. One was, okay, I got to get out of this town, because something in you, in your spirit, your soul, your brain, whatever it was within you, was like, okay, I know there's nothing for me here. I need to leave. That's a really important point to make, because a lot of people don't have that. They're stuck in a situation, and their question for themselves is, why am I stuck? What's going on? And the answer is, you're stuck in your physical space. Get out of there. Like, just leave. Even recognize that, oh, if I just change where I am physically, my scenario will change. So there's somebody out there probably listening to this right now that your struggle is, hey, whatever town you're in, house you're in, situation you're in, you got to get out. That could be a solution to your problem. So I think that's huge for you to have that mindset. Second thing that stood out to me was, you used your father's put downs as fuel rather than water. It wasn't like you had, and rather than it putting out this desire that you had and these flames that you had to succeed and accomplish something, you use it as fuel instead, and be like, I'm going to show you. I can relate to that, because I was the same way. Anyone that told me I couldn't do something, it was like, screw you, then I'll show you that I can. So that's an amazing quality that you have. The other thing I was going to say is, if you want to get out of your situation, for me, I could as a teenager, because I had a driver's license. I could get in my car and leave. You can't. You can't drive. Like, how does that affect your formative years as a teenager in high school? You cannot get in a car and go anywhere.
I remember perfectly. As soon as I turned 16, because it was questionable up to that point of like, can I drive?
Oh, so it was actually still a question. There was maybe.
Well, I didn't know. Like when I'm 13
geez.
or 14, right?
Sure,
when you turn 16, that's when you get your driver's permit, or that's where you can at least test for it, right?
Test for it, okay.
Yeah. So the first thing I did was go to my eye doctor, and that was my question. All right, like, this is it, you know, can I do it? And he said, listen, you can go and you can pay for the test, but it's a waste of your money because you won't pass the eye test. I was like, really? He's like, yeah. So there's no driving in my future. He's like, no. So you like put yourself in my shoes, right?
I'm trying.
Try picking up a girl in high school when you're like, yeah, hey, my mom, she'll pick us up. She'll drop us off and drive us. I can't. My dad can't because he's got DUIs, so he can't drive anymore.
Yeah.
And then
my dad can pick us up on his lawnmower.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, Steve. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, dude. You're always the dude, the passenger in your best friend's car. You know what I mean? You're always that guy. You like, see, I really stacked the deck against myself from like, I liked pro wrestling, which was kind of cool in the 90s because it was a hot period, but also not.
Yeah. Also definitely not at the same time.
I said I really stacked the deck against myself here from a social standpoint.
Yes.
Based on like my vision is already what it is, but then I happen to like professional wrestling, like obsessed with it, which is, it's like I said, it's kind of cool because we're in the late 90s at the time, but not necessarily the coolest to the opposite sex. And then like all my music, I like hardcore heavy music, right? So Slipknot is like my favorite band at the time. So I'm wearing all this like crazy Slipknot merch. Like it's a complete like
I'm just laughing so hard because take out the first part, like just hey, I love wrestling and Slipknot. I can just imagine you know, with your Coke bottle glasses, just walking down the street, and like some girls like, oh, maybe I'm kind of attracted to this rebel dude or this different guy. Like, hey, you want to come pick me up? And like maybe we'll go to a movie. We'll watch the latest Halloween horror flick. It's like, sweet, yeah, I'll come by. My mom will pick us up.
Yeah.
It's like shit. Oh, Steve. Yeah. So, like, I just want to plant this seed right now. We're going to talk about this later, but you're still always a passenger in a car.
Yeah.
So
I'm a passenger. Anyway.
Yeah. So to succeed in wrestling, that one of the hardest parts of wrestling is travel. And for me, it's one of the hardest. It's the hardest part. The part I despise the most, and I shouldn't despise the hard word. It's just the hardest part of my job is the travel. And I have a driver's license and can get anywhere at any moment because of that. You can't. We'll touch on that later, but I just want to blowing some people's minds right now. Those people that have never thought of that. The fact that's why you're such a successful person. So what, as this young kid that's, living in low income housing in a trailer park that can't see well, why did you start watching wrestling? What drew you to it? What made you start to think, yep, this is something that has to be in my life?
From what I was told, when I was like 2 years old, my mom would sit me down in front of wrestling. So I don't have those memories, obviously.
Interesting.
But, yes. When she was around, that's the story she'd tell me. I sat you down at 2 years old, and I could cook and just like get dinner ready. And if wrestling was on TV, you stayed glued to it. Oh. So I always remember watching wrestling from everything. Like my grandparents would tell me stories about watching WrestleMania 3, and I'm 3 years old, so I don't have these cognizant memories, but it's always been in my life.
Sure.
And just for whatever reason, whatever it was, it just drew me to it. Like the characters, the colors, the action, all of it was like it just drew me to it. I was just fascinated. Yeah. And I think when you go back and we're saying like how I used my dad's put downs as fuel, part of that might have been just my upbringing from watching professional wrestling, because those guys were tough. They were fighters.
Oh, right.
And they weren't going to let anything stand in their way. They're going to get that championship, or they're going to get that such and such. And like, it was always, move forward, go forward in some sort of like, manly, yelly, screamy way, especially back then. So I don't know if that's a subconscious thing that was kind of instilled in me, but perhaps that's where that kind of came from,
Absolutely. That answers my next question, Steve, because I was going to say, what life lessons did you get from wrestling as a kid? And that's a question that you could get a whole lot of different answers from, and you would think the average person would be like, well, you're not getting very many good life lessons from wrestling. These dudes beating the living crap out of each other. But for you, that even if it was just subconscious lesson that you learned was, no, I'm always going to be moving forward. And when people put an obstacle in front of my way, in this case, maybe it's Big John Studd trying to body slam him, I'm gonna do whatever I have to do to move forward to accomplish that goal. And whether you consciously learn that or not, you definitely subconsciously did. And you're still applying those to this day. Have you thought about that?
No, not in those terms.
Yeah,
no,
it's crazy though. It's crazy to think about though. Yeah. So, okay. Is there any other life lessons that you would have learned from wrestling other than, striving forward in your goals no matter what?
I want to say it's going to take work, right? It's going to take work, and you're going to have to do things that aren't necessarily comfortable for you. I don't have a specific thing to follow that up with, but
no.
That's kind of what I've definitely learned, as a kid growing up watching wrestling, was it takes, and this also comes from because again, when I say watching wrestling, I'm not I'm obsessed, right? A lot of your guests, I'm assuming are
myself.
So,
yes, totally. And our listeners are obsessed.
Sure,
so they know exactly what you're talking about.
So I'm not just watching the weekly shows or Saturday Super. I'm watching any documentary I can find, and every little piece of I don't know, background stuff of what it took to get there. Reading books. There was a moment in time where all these wrestlers were coming out with books, and reading is so difficult for me because I have to sit here with a magnifying glass, and it's got to be the proper light, and then I have to it's just a really painful process to do. So I don't read barely anymore. I never do, which sucks because I rather enjoyed it when I was able to do it, but I digress. All these wrestlers were coming out with books, so I would read all these books painfully, but I'm getting all of this knowledge of the struggles and what it took to get there, and so that was always instilled in me okay, well, it's not going to be easy, and I didn't even know how to do it either. I just knew that if there was an option to do it, I just knew it was going to be really hard.
Yes, and I think that's true for anything in life. When something is difficult and there's resistance, then that's going to lead to growth. If you can go through that resistance, you're going to grow as a person. And you knew that from reading these books and taking in as much content as you could. You realized, wait a minute, all these people that have succeeded in this wild, crazy dream and accomplishing this goal to be a wrestler have overcome this resistance. And then as you start to train and as you start to lift weights and learn your physical body works the exact same way as your brain does, you need to have resistance in order for your muscles to grow. You need resistance for your brain to grow and to expand and to be able to move forward. So as you're reading these books, you're probably similar to me. So as a kid, I'm obsessed. I'm watching wrestling, have all these heroes, learning these lessons. But it never really crosses my mind consciously. I know it did subconsciously, but I never consciously say to myself, yep, I can do this. I can be Hulk Hogan. All I got to do is work really hard and join a wrestling school, and then I'll get into that school and I'll become a wrestler. Like that, I had no idea how the heck I could go and train to be a professional wrestler. That wasn't even a reality for me until I picked up Mick Foley's book and started reading and realizing, oh, there's schools for this. I can actually learn this like I would be learning a trade and go to a school to learn this. Is that what your experience was? Like, how did you realize, all right, I can actually learn this stuff to do this?
Yeah. So yes, we're very similar in the sense. Like I remember like I'm working out at 13 and 14 in my cousin's basement, lifting bricks and just homemade weights that he used.
Awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
And so because I needed to be in shape. I'm tiny, right? I'm tiny as it pertains to pro wrestling in general, but as a kid, I'm like 110, 120, 130 pounds.
Yeah.
But I knew that it took, you had to have muscles. I learned through that was like that's also a mental therapy, because when shit would get crazy at home, I would escape and I would go work out. I could listen to music and I would work out for hours, and it would be like, oh, again, I'm changing my surroundings.
Yes.
Right. I don't want to be stuck in this surrounding. I found my own positive surrounding where I can change my thoughts and all that stuff. And so that became a regular routine for me. So that was always the case. But again, like once I outgrew that little workout area, I had to go find a gym, and then I had to find workout partners who I could rely on to get me to and from said gym, because it was for me to walk it would take over an hour or 2 hours. For me to bike there and back in the summertime, I would do that. I would bike an hour there. I would do legs and then bike back home. So, I didn't know how I was going to be a wrestler, but I knew I always wanted to be a wrestler. It was like when I was in kindergarten, we went through around the class and they asked, "What do you want to be?" And I said, "Comedian," because I like to make people laugh. Comic book artist, because I like to draw, or pro wrestler, because I love pro wrestling. Those are my three. So
amazing. Mine's exactly the same except for number 2, because I can't draw. But
okay.
My answers were exactly the same. I think I might have said rock star instead of an artist, but same thing.
Yeah. I would love to be a rock star as well. Yeah. I have that's it's performance. It's
yes,
all performance.
Hell yeah.
But so like yes, Hart Family School was obviously.
Yep, that was my number one.
Because we're Canadian, and that was publicized on pro wrestling television for us. So I knew that was a thing, but I never knew how I would get there or anything like that. And it wasn't until a mutual friend of ours, Jake O'Reilly, said he found a school in Cambridge, which meant nothing to me because I don't know geography. So Cambridge could have been anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't know where it is.
Yeah, of course.
I can't read a map. No idea, but cool. How close is this?
Yes.
How close is this wrestling school? And I'm 18 at the time. I'm just about to graduate high school. And that's when this option is presented to me. And I didn't know how to take it at first. Actually, I didn't want to do it. I was like, oh no, I don't. I'm 120 pounds and I'm just about to graduate high school. I feel like in all the books and stuff that I'm reading, like these wrestling books, like they always say, get a plan B.
Yeah.
Because wrestling is not forever.
Yes.
It's a temporary business. Always has been, always will be. Bump cards fill up, and your body can only last for so long. So, and God forbid something happens to you midway through your career and you have to fall back on something else. So always have a plan B. So in my brain, it was, again, I don't want to do plan B because it sounds boring. Plan A sounds way better. But also scary, because I didn't know if it would be a reality. And now that it was staring me in the face, it was very intimidating. And so I had this choice to make, because I'm debating on doing school, but maybe wrestling, I don't know. And like looking back, the option of doing both never really occurred to me for some reason. But for anybody listening, you can definitely do both for sure. But either way, so I had this conversation with my mom. And I remember she's always been my number one fan, and I always got along with her throughout my entire childhood. So I called her and I said, "Mom, here's the deal. Jake O'Reilly is he's found a wrestling school, and I could potentially go train there, but I'm thinking I'm pretty small and I should get my plan B. So maybe I go to college. There'll be a gym there. I'll work out really hard throughout college, and when I'm done that, then maybe I can be more presentable to go to wrestling school." And she said, "Buddy, there's no age limit on college. There will definitely be an age limit on pro wrestling. You've wanted this all your life. Now's the chance. Go do it." I was like, all right.
That's going to do it for part 1 with Crazy Steve. What an origin story. What a life that this guy has led. And this is just the beginning, guys. This is just part one. Next week is going to be part 2 of this trilogy of my sit down interview with my buddy Crazy Steve. And it only gets crazier from here, pun intended. We've just kind of scratched the surface on his upbringing and the life lessons that he learned as a young man and how he's able to deal with all the things that he's been able to deal with. We're just scratching the surface now. We've done the origin story. Now it's time to move on to the next phase of his journey. That'll be happening next week right here. This episode drops each and every Thursday on all podcast platforms as well as YouTube, youtube.com/@CodyDienerPodcast. If you don't want to wait till next week, because now you're totally hooked and you're like, I'm not waiting until next week. I need to hear the rest of the story and I need to hear it now. We live in a culture where it's a now culture. I want everything now. I want my food now. I want my show now. I don't want to wait till next week to watch a show. Well, guess what? You don't have to wait till next week. You can listen and watch part 2 and 3 with Crazy Steve right now. Just go on over to patreon.com/CodyDiener and sign up at one of the levels, either a level 1 mark, level 2 smart mark, or a level 3 Diener Maniac mega mark. And you can listen to that episode early and ad free, the full interview right now. That's over at patreon.com/CodyDiener. Not only does that give you that awesome content, but it also supports me and helps me bring this podcast to you for free each and every week. That's just one way you can support me. You can also go to prowrestlingtees.com/CodyDiener, buy a t-shirt. You can go to cameo.com/CodyDiener, get a cameo with me. My buddy Crazy Steve has both of those things too. He's got a Pro Wrestling Tees store. Go buy a Crazy Steve shirt. He's doing Cameo, painting his face up, doing sweet videos for people. Go Crazy Steve, go to Cameo, type in Crazy Steve. He's got videos too. He's awesome at that. I also need to tell you about this. Again, you heard this earlier in the episode, but we got to plug it again because I'm not just going to plug my own stuff. I got to plug for my buddy too. Net Pro Studios. If you are one of these people right now, you're listening to this, you're young or old, doesn't matter what your age is, but you've always thought, I want to get into the professional wrestling business. What do I do? I got people messaging me all the time about how do I get into wrestling? What do I need to do? And man, you have to go to wrestling school and you have to find a credible wrestling school to join to learn how to do this business right. Well, the place for you to go is Net Pro Studios. It's a new venture that Crazy Steve is going on, opening a wrestling school. They teach you out of the beautiful Bobby Eaton Arena, which couldn't be blessed by a better wrestler and family than Bobby Eaton and his family. Rest in peace. And this is the place to go. You know that you've learned a lot from today from just listening to Crazy Steve. Imagine getting to learn from him each and every day, each and every week, following your dream and being mentored by somebody like Crazy Steve. Man, I can't put him over enough and his wrestling school over enough. He's got years, decades of knowledge that he's willing to drop on you. And go to Net Pro Studios on Facebook. They got social media. Just type in Net Pro Studios. You'll find all their stuff and learn about their amazing wrestling school now. That's going to do it for another episode of Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with Cody Diener. Rate, review, and subscribe. Drop me a review, guys. If you're listening to this on Spotify, do me a solid. Go into the review section. Give me a 5-star review or whatever stars. I'm not going to force you to tell you what you have to give me, but if you're really enjoying this, please hit the 5 stars and type in a quick little review. That helps the algorithm, helps more people learn about me, and helps advertisers come to me and want to give me some money for doing this. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, do the same. You can go in, write a review. I get it, guys. I don't do this. I didn't start doing this until I got a podcast myself and realized how important these reviews are. So all the podcasts that I listen to and support each and every week by listening, I've started to go in and type in reviews and just telling them why I love them and why I'm listening each and every week, the things that I like about it, because I know that helps support them and helps spread the love in terms of what I'm doing. So if you are enjoying this, please just go write a review on your Apple, Spotify, or whatever platform you're listening to this on and drop me some love. I appreciate all the love I'm getting from everybody each and every week. You guys tell me how much you're appreciating the things that you're learning And I know that you have learned a lot from my friend today, Crazy Steve, about life and about wrestling and everything in between, because that's what we're here for. And that's what we're learning each and every week. And we'll see you next week. But we got more with my buddy Crazy Steve. Oh, man, it's going to be a good one. So next Thursday, make sure you come on back, and we'll see you for another episode for part 2 next week of Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with me, Cody Diener.
Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life. Wrestling is life is wrestling.